The United States has 4% of the world's population, and we take 80% of the world's prescription narcotics. Another interesting statistic is since 1999, the number of narcotic prescriptions of the US has quadrupled. My guest today is Michele Zumwalt. She works as a law enforcement chaplain and sees many senseless deaths from prescription addiction. This is a growing problem, each year more than the last. Michele is also the author of Ruby Shoes, and I have to tell you, this is a real serious problem here today, and a lot of times people don't really are aware of what is happening, and yet it's a growing concern. Is there a problem that you have right now, and how will you deal with it? Are you going like most of the people do, go in hiding about it, or deny that it exists, or are you willing to confront it and say, no more, I am ready to make a difference? And that is, my friend, what this show is about. Michele, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, how serious is this problem of prescription drugs addictions?
You know, I'll tell you personally, it almost killed me many years ago. And after almost dying from it, and then several years later going in through the academy to become a law enforcement chaplain for Sacramento County, I just started seeing more and more people die. And the number of senseless deaths is just, well, it has quadrupled along with the number of the narcotic prescriptions. Most people start on narcotics with a legitimate injury. They have a chronic pain problem.
Like a headache, a migraine.
Right. And it just, you know, it catches them off guard. So it's a really big problem. We have record numbers of people dying. The first death notification I ever did was to parents of a son that had overdosed on OxyContin, and from there it was just more and more every year.
Wow.
So I knew that I needed to stop and write this book and tell the story of hope, that we don't have to die from this.
Now you have a tough job to do. Nobody wants to really see you, basically, if you think about it.
Yeah.
But you ended up getting in this because you yourself were involved in this. How did it start for you?
So I started on prescriptions in college, very little bit.
Why did you start?
So I had headaches, really bad headaches that I was getting, migraine headaches.
Now, did they try to find out what the cause of these headaches were?
They just pretty much diagnosed it as migraines pretty quickly. My mom had them before, and they're, you know, they run in families and things, but I started on opiates, specifically Demerol, pretty quickly, and like I said, it just spiraled for me. It hit me, like I describe it in my story, as if it was a tornado. It just kind of swept me, you know, off, and I was swept away in this huge Category 5 tornado before I even knew what it was. I mean,
it just kind of takes over. You take more, and your body wants more and more because it gets used and adjusted to it. Now, when did you start realizing that you yourself were actually in trouble?
I think, you know, I started running a drug fever early on. Probably a few months into it.
Tell me, what does a drug fever mean?
It's a low-grade fever from just, you know, chronic use, daily use of it. You're right about what happens with prescription addiction is that you build a tolerance to it. So you need a little bit more and a little bit more, and you need it more frequently. And I think when the first realization that I had a problem with it was in the hospital when I had a nurse come in. They were going to move me to get an MRI done. They were going to look at the brain scan and everything, and they were taking me to another hospital. And in laying there, the nurse comes in with this large injection, and I was like, oh, yay, a lot of this stuff. And she said, you know, if there's nothing on this brain scan, then we're going to have to maybe look at the fact that it's all this medicine. And I remember stopping and saying a prayer and saying, please, God, let them find something on this brain scan. Because I was at a place where I would rather have a few months to live than for them to suggest that they were going to take away what I needed.
That's called denial, yeah.
Yes, and
that's
so
very much
I knew at that point I was probably in trouble, but I just didn't think I would come out of it alive, you know.
Now, how long from the time you got a prescription to the time that you realized you were in trouble? What was that time period that was between there?
So it was really hard. I spent a lot of time talking to medical students and doctors and also recovery facilities and all over the place, but one of the reasons I do that is because for prescription people, it's really, my story was that I relapsed a lot. Even after, you know, I had a seizure and just almost died from it and started to get better, it took me a long time my family intervened, put me in a care unit where I started getting introduced to 12-step recovery, and even then I felt like I'm not like everybody.
So how many years? Did it take years? Did it take months?
It was probably about a 3-year period for me before
so
I
for
first
you to
got
be a
introduced.
full-blown addict, all it took was 3 years.
No, it probably was quicker than that. It took me longer to come into, maybe a year, a few months to a year before I was really hooked on it.
Now, did they ever find out what was wrong with you?
The headaches I was having, just regular headaches.
It was just a normal headache. So you have a
Yes.
normal headache here, you're just sitting there, and they keep giving you more medication. What would have been the real answer?
Well, the narcotics aren't necessarily a good choice for that, especially like opioid narcotics, because what happens is you start getting a headache if you don't have it. They call them rebound headaches. But so, I think they've learned a lot over the years, although we're still writing a lot of medications. And the doctors are in a quandary these days, especially because they're in trouble if they write it, and they're in trouble if they don't write it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if they write a prescription, and somebody gets hooked on it, they're in trouble. But also, they're in trouble if somebody comes and says, "I'm in a lot of pain," and they don't give them pain medicine.
How can they be in trouble for that, though? Because
I don't know. It's just. I think it's just
like that. Yeah.
I think it's just the way it is. So what I've been spending a lot of time with medical students saying is, in recovery, they say, I always bring them pickles, because they say in recovery, once you're a pickle, you'll never be a cucumber again, right? And I said, you're in charge of the pickle juice. That's a good way to think of it. So
that's a great way to put it.
And the other thing I ask physicians is, I'm always saying, how hard is it to treat pickles? And they all go, oh my goodness, they're incredibly hard. Because those of us that are already pickled, sometimes we'll pretend to be cucumbers to get what we need. And so we're just, it's very hard to treat
I like
somebody
your
once
pickle
they're
cucumber
addicted.
example.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to that, because you actually ended up in the ICU.
Yes.
And it got very, very
Yes.
serious. When Michele Zumwalt ended up in the ICU, the doctors above her said, we are losing her. She is going to die. What happened next? You want to see this, because it's incredible, because Michele was begging for her life to God. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Thomas with Pray and Obey, and I really want to recommend that you spend the time watching Barb's TV. Barb TV is a hands-on example of how other people have defeated situations in their life that have held others back. These people have walked with God and have found that His answers always work. So I highly recommend that you watch Barb TV. I believe that you will see things where it will speak to you directly, and God will give you examples of how you can change your life for the better. Barb TV is a TV show that shows you examples of victories in their lives. So again, I highly recommend that you would spend the time and watch Barb TV. It is done on a weekly situation, and it is worth watching. God bless you, and thank you very much.
Overdoses kill more people than car accidents. Every 19 minutes, someone dies from prescription addiction. And one of those was Michele Zumwalt, who's with us today. While she again has relapsed, while she again is back in the hospital, she ends up in ICU. And while she is there, the doctors above her, right in front of her, are telling each other, we are going to lose her. That moment that they said, we are going to lose her. How did you get to that point to begin with?
Well, it would, like I said, with the relapses, what I would end up doing is I'd think, I would get caught off guard. I would think, maybe this time it'll be a little bit different. Maybe this time I can, make it with, and I wouldn't talk to anybody about it. That's another big thing. The devil loves
hiding,
it when we're all by ourselves, and I'm not talking to my family, my husband, or anybody about it. And I would start on a very, some sort of prescription, and then within a few weeks, it would just like catapult to this huge problem for me. And I was back in ICU. This was the very end for me. I was in ICU at Mercy Folsom, and I remember it. I've thought about people that overdose a lot, because I began to die in the same way that so
that
many
they
other
did.
people
So you
don't.
already were aware
Right,
of
I
that.
was
You saw
dying.
the statistics. So you're in ICU, you're
Right.
laying there, and then
my lungs filled with fluids, and my saturation level dropped below 50%, and I started that death rattle they mentioned, but I knew I was dying. My body felt like I was a stone. If you ever felt somebody that was already passed, it felt like I was just rock hard and I couldn't move, as if my spirit had already left my body. And I saw this faint vision of my youngest daughter at the end of the bed, and her name's Katie, and she was just 4.5, and she was just standing there. And I knew I was dying. I knew that my grace had run out, that I was at the end of my life there in the hospital. And I started begging God. I started saying, please, please, Jesus, I will never do
we
this
have
again.
all said that before.
Yes.
So God
Yeah.
knows. So,
Yes.
But you're serious this time.
This time I knew it was up for me. And the other couple things I always tell people, when you're alone with your Creator, you know exactly who you're talking to. If I ever had any lingering about my faith, I knew I was talking to Jesus. I knew that's who I was crying out to at that moment. The other thing I knew that I needed to know was that I was fully loved by Him. In my most broken, most sinful place, laying in that hospital bed where I had done nothing but selfish and sinful behavior to get there. It was all about me and what I needed in this addiction. He loved me completely, just completely, and I needed to know that. I needed to know that I was good enough right there, you know.
And you actually felt that compassion of God upon you.
yes.
So were you ready that moment to meet your Creator?
I think if I hadn't had that vision of Katie at the end of my bed, and I later find out why, you know, a year and a half later, why she was standing there, but God showed me, but I didn't understand it at the time because I have another daughter that's a little older, and I couldn't figure out why. I just saw Katie, but that's another story.
No. We want to know, girl. We want to know. So why Katie?
Okay, so there was something that happened in the next year to Katie that's written about in my book, but it was a trying experience for our family where we needed to really find forgiveness, and I needed to be whole, and the mother that God needed me strong and to be, you know, God loving, fearing mother and living a surrendered life to be able to help her through what was coming ahead for her.
So what you're basically saying is God used Katie in a vision at the bed that you're dying,
Yes.
to let you know you were going to live, your prayer was going to be answered because Katie needed you.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly it.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't understand it all at the time, but I knew I needed to be here for Katie. That's what I knew.
Wow.
And I was begging and begging. And
how long were you begging?
Oh, you know, I think God in His infinite wisdom left me in that bed in ICU for about 45 minutes before I started feeling tingling in my hands. And my husband, that evening, nobody was with me. It was just God and I, and that vision of Katie. And that evening, he was in ICU with me, and he had been so lost and so scared about what's going to happen, you know. And because he couldn't save me, nobody could save me. And I told him about what had happened, and he said, "Do you have your white flag?" You know, he had just been begging God for so long, and I brought my white flag to show you.
Oh.
I said, "I'll use this white flag. It's my wristband from the hospital that day." So I often, when I speak to people, I hand out white flags, not like this, but hankies or whatever, as spiritual tools to remember that I have to surrender my life to God every day, you know, and just trust Him with all things. So.
Wow. So you're out there, you make it through that first day.
Right.
And then I read that you had a stroke
I
3
did.
days later. What happened?
Well, because the
Why
trauma with the
now?
body, I think I was so joyful to be alive and to be breathing in and out. When I had the stroke, I couldn't, when I went back to church and meetings and things, I couldn't hold anything with my left hand. But I began to think of it as, you know, how Paul, when he writes about the thorn in
But you were still in the hospital, right, when the stroke
No,
happened?
the stroke happened when I was at home. Yeah, so I went back to the hospital. But I think of it as I still have a weakness on the left side with typing or with anything. If I pull the turkey out of the oven,
Was there
I
a
need
possible
somebody to help me.
reason that stroke happened because God allowed that stroke to happen to remind you
Yes.
to not go back. I'm
Right.
just guessing at
Yeah,
this, you know,
and
I'm like,
every
why
time I have that
now?
weakness-
Why? So
I think I needed to have a physical reminder that every time I have this weakness on this side, I can say, thank you, God, that I'm breathing in and out. Thank you that
you're there for
I have
your
another
kids.
chance at life, you know.
Wow.
It's a beautiful thing. It wasn't a bad thing at all.
Wow. And you can say it with a smile today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's good. There's
Absolutely.
more. You've written a book, and I want you to know, are you hearing this? I am like, she is not blaming God for what has happened to her. She is not complaining about the past migraines, but she's saying, even with a stroke, God is and was there, and He is there for you too. He wants to love on you, He wants to help you, and He wants to encourage you. I'd love for you to contact us so we can start loving on you. Our number is 855-515-5550, or go to our website, barbtv.org. What do ruby shoes and drug addiction have in common? Stay tuned.
Wanted a mentor that could help you move forward faster? Have you ever wanted to take some time and just cry out to God, Lord, I just need someone who can help me to deal with all these situations in my life? Well, I want to tell you something. BarbTV.org is the place that you want to go. This is a time for you to be refreshed and restored. Real, clear-cut messages that will help you move forward faster in your life. Today is the day that God is answering your prayers. Get pen, paper, and your favorite beverage. Sit down and really listen to what they have to say. It's time, and God is calling you. How are you going to respond? Again, go to BarbTV.org today.
Opiate painkillers, sedatives, tranquilizers, and stimulants have important medical uses, and we all agree with that. But they also stimulate the reward center of the brain. In susceptible individuals, this can lead to misuse substance, abuse, or addiction, and it has led to the development of an illicit market for these medications. With me today is Michele Zumwalt. She is an advocate for legislative advancement in treating drug addictions, and she has successfully changed California state law, specifically the way opiates are distributed. Millions of people worldwide are addicted to prescription drugs. How do we solve this problem that has become huge? Michele recently wrote a book, one of the first of its kind, called Ruby Shoes, and this book launched as the #1 hot new release on Amazon in all 3 categories. Michele, ruby slippers and addiction, what in the world does that have in common?
You know, I think all the years working as a chaplain, as a law enforcement chaplain, I realized that the addiction process really affects the whole family, right?
That's correct.
So my mom wrote the foreword, and what I wanted to do was find a metaphor that people could relate to, the essence of addiction, being trapped somewhere else, like in the movie, The Wizard of Oz. She's trapped somewhere else and she can't get home, right? And so the story, The Wizard of Oz, opened, just had so many wonderful metaphors that I could use in that it relates to. Specifically, the ruby shoes is kind of a turning point chapter from in the hospital.
Yeah.
When I realized that all this time, like Dorothy, she had been, I had been raised in a Christian family in the South, by the way, and I had been given this free gift that was washed in the blood of Jesus, and I was walking around trapped in this other place, unable to get back, and yet I had the power all along. I had been there running around trying to prove myself worthy to the world and trying to, do all these things, and yet I had the power of Jesus anytime. And my husband couldn't do it for me.
It was you that had to surrender it, right?
My mom and dad couldn't. Nobody, the state of California, all the legislative change, nothing could fix me. I had to surrender this and come home to Jesus. That was the
Wow.
answer. So it's kind of a metaphor that reminds me.
So your book is one of its kind because when you got out of the hospital and your family probably started to intervene at this point,
Right.
they knew there was a problem. They knew
Right.
there was a huge problem. So I assume you were starting to go to AA meetings, but did you really fit in? Because that's usually about alcohol and drugs.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things I share a lot with the medical profession is with prescription people, we feel like we're not an alcoholic, and then we go to, other 12-step meetings when they're talking about drugs that I've never even heard of. So it's real easy to say, I'm different than everybody. But my sponsor in recovery, you would love this woman. She says, I write about her some in the book, but she says to me, Michele, it's like you're saying, I'm a German Shepherd and I'm a dog. She said, you may be a special breed of dog, I'll give you that, but until you accept your caninism, you ain't never going to get better.
Oh, that's a
So I needed
great way to put it.
So I found these women that are around me today that are seeking God's plan for their life, but they're also helping me look at the similarities and how we all get lost, all of us. Whether you got as lost as I did, hopefully not, but we all get lost. And so they help us look at seeking God's will, and it's the same thing for all of us. We all get lost in sin and struggles, and so I'm looking for the similarities for people that are trying to live in God's will and walk in His will, one day at a time.
So did you, after you realized the real problem and you have been writing the book, I remember with me when I had an eating disorder for 17 years, the urge to break free
Yes.
is more than overcoming the addiction itself. It took 2 years for me to overcome it. It wasn't God being slow, it was me taking my time
Right.
to surrender it. But once that happened and God really got my attention, I think it still took like 7 years for that urge to want to go back.
Yeah.
Have you experienced any of
So
that?
my struggle was early, like from the time my parents intervened in the care unit, like in the 90s, to all the way to 2003. That was that struggle. A few years in, a few years out, that kind of stuff. But I laid it all down at the hospital with my white flag. I laid it all down
And let it go.
there.
You surrendered
and that was
fully.
a full, that was a full surrender there. So
That is awesome. Now, Michele, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
You know what? I am so available. I'm available on Facebook, on Twitter. My email is also in the book. I've been hearing from people all over the country, some from other parts of the world.
So what is can they contact you under Ruby Shoes on Facebook?
Right, Ruby Shoes, Surviving Prescription Drug Addiction, Michele Zumwalt on Facebook, Michele Zumwalt on Twitter.
They can
But
get a
I'd
hold of
love
you
to
that
hear
way.
from anybody who just needs prayer or another friend that knows what it
Great.
feels like.
Thank
We
you.
need each other. The first word and the first step is we, and I really believe that God designed us to get through these things together.
You're right.
Alone, that's one of the reasons about prescriptions that it gets us in so much trouble, because it is such a lonely disease. We don't do it out anywhere social. We're alone with it.
together.
And when I'm in trouble, the devil has me surrounded.
Wow, and this is your book. It looks, I love how you put the cover
Oh,
together. It
thank
looks
you.
absolutely great.
Thank you.
Thank you for being vulnerable and being real, because this
thank you.
show is about no phony baloney,
Absolutely.
real Christianity.
Oh,
thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it was an honor. So, and then to you right now, what I'd like to talk to you about is a story, and that really impacted me. For years and years and years ago, I tried to help somebody that was extremely overweight, and we have been going back and forward for years, and I heard her story, and I'm gonna give her the name Claudia. And while Claudia and I met the first time, we really started visiting and everything seemed fine, and we looked with the scale, but then we started looking at the deep, real problem underneath her addiction. And what came forward so clearly was that she was really, really struggling with her past. Her dad already beat her up before she was even born by beating up her mom. It made an impact on her health, which caused her to need surgery after she was born. And then years later, she ended up in an affair and has always hid this from her husband. And I have noticed, as long as she has been in hiding, as long as she kept things a secret, like even the addiction that Michele just told us, as long as she's been stuck there, there is no recovery happening. She loves the Lord, but she is stuck. And this is a point I don't want you to be at. So a couple of weeks ago, Claudia called again, and while she called, she asked for prayer again. And I kind of prayed with her, but thinking within myself, Lord, when is she going to get this right? And that night I had a dream. And this dream right now is for you. And the dream showed me Claudia laying on a bed, sick and struggling to walk because she was so overweight. And she was sick and not doing great. And Jesus looking upon her and coming alongside her with such incredible compassion. And he told me that moment, Barbara, don't just look at the surface, but go into the depth. There is more to it than you think. Love on her like I love her. And the Bible just backs this up in the way it says it right here, because in Matthew 9, verse 35 and 36, it says, and 36, it says this: Jesus was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. And that message right now, my dear friend, that is for you. It is the message that when Michele was dying, she received in the ICU on her deathbed. She felt an incredible love, an incredible compassion from Jesus. And that's what he wants to give from you. So will you call us so we can love on you? 855-515-5550, or will you go to our website, barbtv.org. Let us pray for you. God loves you. God has compassion for you, and he wants to help you. And so do I. Have a great day. With me today is a very special guest, Pastor Wally, and if you want to look at his first two shows that he has done with us, Death by Hanging in Saudi Arabia, please go to our website, barbtv.org. Since the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, 43 million Christians have become martyrs.
I was very scared when I was taken by the Islamic fanatics. And my wife, my daughter were very terrified. And the underground Christians who were with us became very scared too, and they all went into hiding. In the present moment, you know, our contacts in Kurdistan, where tens of thousands of Christians are in refugee camps.
You want to hear this? Stay tuned.